there's an ideal material flow onto the job site that should be synchronized with the production flow, which is the construction schedule, right? If these two things aren't aligned, there's always a gap. Either you have too much material or too little. Teams aren't as focused as they should, but I think it's changing now. We have the most hardworking people in the front lines, and what's inefficient is all of these supporting processes. So our goal is to make that process as efficient and seamless as possible. Let's get the right materials at the right time. Let the builders who are amazing build.
We have a bunch of planners and schedulers out there. When you say database, and I think you said buyout log, just describe that a little bit more so we're all on the same page. What data is it? What buyout log? What's happening in pre-construction that's getting you that information? Hi, folks. A quick one before we dive into this week's episode. Our book, The Critical Path Career, How to Advance in Construction and Planning and Scheduling, is out now, and you can order it on Amazon. We'll include a link below. This is a great way to show support for the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and Greg and I have worked extremely hard taking everything we know in our 30 years of experience, plus everything we've picked up from shooting this podcast, and we've tried to pack it into an information-dense book that you can use right away. In the book, we have specific strategies on how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, and find a new job. We include 26 of the best interview questions that we have come across, in addition to 34 specific impact ideas that you can go use on your projects today. We want to thank everyone who's shown us support so far and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and scheduling leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah Piippo, and I'm a planning and scheduling manager.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eshan, CEO of Krane. We make sure that projects have the right materials at the right time and in the right quantities.
Today, we're talking about material management. And we got a hot one today for you. Eshan, are you ready?
Excited, man.
Let's
bring it on.
Here's the challenge. You've been assigned to a large multi-billion-dollar hospital project, and they have no material management, no idea of how they want to manage their materials or procurement on site, and you've been tasked to fix it. How do you do it?
It's not a simple question to answer directly, I guess. As you understand, there's multiple stakeholders involved, right? This whole process starts in pre-construction, making sure that you have the different types of material associated on your projects. You have your long lead items, you have your consumables. The first step is to make sure you have that database set up so that you identify risk with the different types of material. So that's where we would begin from a general contractor.
Let's dive into that a little bit. We have a bunch of planners and schedulers out there. Maybe they don't know everything to know about material management. When you say database, and I think you said buyout log, just describe that a little bit more so we're all on the same page. What data is it? What buyout log? What's happening in pre-construction that's getting you that information?
Look, I think, it'll start with your takeoffs, right? Like you, as a general contractor, make sure you have a general takeoff of like the material on your project. And then you figure out what are you buying out, leveraging your specialty subcontractors. And then all of that data mostly is on an Excel sheet where your project manager or your project executive team is really collaborating to set up, to control so that there is no delays. That's where it starts. But slowly, as they bring in the subcontractors and specialty contractors, that data in that database gets updated so that you reduce and de-risk that material issues.
Yeah, one of those things that, and correct me if I'm wrong, they have to do that process anyways to price out the job. So that's a lot of that information is going to be actually captured and put together to create an estimate to potentially go bid the job or buy out the job or do whatever. So then if that's sometimes looked at as the primary use, how do you first interject yourself in the process and say, wait a second, folks, this data is also going to be used downstream to manage the project. I got to imagine that's a bit of a conflict. How do you handle that?
Yeah, I think that's where honestly the process stops. But the good GCs take that buyout log and create a procurement log, right, where they track what the subcontractors and the specialty contractors should be buying out ahead of time to reduce that variability on the lead times. At the end of the day, although the general might not procure these items directly, they're still in charge to make sure that material arrives on the site and there is no impacts to production across this entire project. So that's where we come in, and this is where there is this gap between what happens in pre-construction to what happens when you actually start the execution phase of your project. All of that work that you've done is almost sort of lost because it's not centralized. And that's a big issue that we see. And then what is the outcome is that we see subs pulling different quantities of material based on their production. There's not a clear plan on how much is needed based on the different scopes of work. And you have a job that's overloaded or even underloaded at times, which is worse. So that's one of the biggest issues that we've seen going from pre-construction to actually the execution phase.
Yeah, I've personally seen many a times where even the pre-construction spreadsheet was 1,000% built to bid the job, and by the time it gets handed to the construction team, I mean, practically almost useless. Like maybe it's kind of, and I think that's also, it starts to drive in some of the processes that, eliminate people from using that information also for the schedule. Because, you know, that high level one milestone schedule that was bid the job, you go to get into construction with it. And now you're also reinventing your procurement spreadsheet, which then isn't the time to then, apply any of that information into your schedule. So I definitely see massive challenges there. Moving into your database, walk me through this. I mean, just so we can kind of tee it for the folks, like what would a good one look like? What sort of information is in there? What does the database look like? Talk us through that piece of, material management log, or, whatever your choice of word you're going to use there.
And I think, look, to be fair to all the great builders out there, I think they do an amazing job up front during pre-construction to identify that risk, maybe put it in their schedule as your lead times for material or even your submittal lead time, so that there is some visibility on what needs to be approved by when to actually kick off this procurement process. As we know, if submittals aren't approved, you can't necessarily release your purchase orders, right? But I think where the gap lies is once construction starts, there is such a difficulty and an effort to sort of get the most up-to-date information from subcontractors and vendors and have that transparency of that supply chain related information. So if you don't have the most relevant and up-to-date information, how do you know what's actually coming onto the job site? So what I think this is where like technology comes in, right? Like you take that data during that pre-construction phase that is sort of done through this collaborative approach, and then you leverage technology to make sure that data is updated as easily as possible by getting that data from subcontractors, from your vendors, from going deeper into the supply chain and getting accurate information. For an example, accurate information on lead times, information on variability of lead times. That's where builders shouldn't waste their time focusing on gathering data. They should focus on building and let like systems that are available bring that information and alert them on what's happening when it comes to the supply chain.
Yeah, I got a feeling, folks, that Eshan, when he's talking about technology, he's not talking about your VLOOKUP either. So, one question I have, I mean, I really want to kind of get down into the weeds of this, get really into the tactics of it. So, walk me through a little bit of this. Of you're going to have a subcontractor who gets issued a package. And again, I'm a smooth-brained scheduler, so if I get any of this wrong, please, feel free to correct me. But the general contractor will issue, let's say, the electrical contractor a package. Here's your electrical package. This is like room 1 to room 2, breakers, conduits, piping, blah, 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 whatever, right? The subcontractor is going to go in there and do some measurements and some takeoffs. The GC's already done some measurements and some takeoffs. And there are also going to be some quantities of materials in there. From that takeoff, they're going to then manage their own material log. So you have lengths, types, other things. What am I missing out of that that's also critical to capture that the subcontractor is going to then provide back to the GC in their material management log? Is that the process? When you say data, is that what we're really getting at?
So I think we're tackling level of detail here when it comes to material, right? I think there's different needs and wants from the general contractor's perspective as well as from a subcontractor. The subcontractor needs to go into the weeds of it, go into the details of what exactly is he ordering and how much. Whereas the general contractor is looking at, hey, what are the critical items on my job across all my trade partners that have a significant impact on my schedule, where if it does not arrive on time, it may push my job. So there's different needs and wants between the GC and the subcontractor, but the subcontractor, yes, right? Like he or she goes into the level of detail after that takeoff and makes sure that they also understand lead times, right, associated with that. Now, again, right, if it's a consumable, you're not too worried about lead times, right? But if it's one of those switch gears or like these items that sort of take months to procure, then you need to get that data point around lead times from the vendors and the supply chain system. That's very important. And the other key piece here is there's this disconnect between material and the schedule or the production, right? Like we see this as there's an ideal material flow onto the job site that should be synchronized with the production flow, which is the construction schedule, right? If these two things aren't aligned, there's always a gap. Either you have too much material or too little. So that's that additional piece that we see teams aren't as focused as they should, but I think it's changing now, which is great.
You can never have too much material. You just order everything and just have it all show up day one, boxes on boxes of stuff. Don't worry about it. Okay, well, so let's say you went in and you set up the initial, you like got over the hurdle from, you took the pre-construction information, you did a great job setting up this material management system. The material management system is up. We're a couple months into the project. How are you managing that material management system for two key outputs? I would say one, let's do like, schedule integration, making sure that this is now aligned to a schedule. And I'm going to make this hard because it's a hot seat. A schedule that isn't fully built because they don't have a baseline yet, like you don't usually have. And then two, to maintain the integrity of this. So everyone doesn't look at your system and say garbage in, garbage out. This thing's never accurate, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I think the schedule is a key input into this system, isn't it? Right. And as you know, we see two different types of schedules here, right? You have your master schedule that sort of looks at your entire project and maybe potentially looks at what are my long lead items and how does that impact my project overall. But you also have a short look ahead schedule that's going into the details of what that project looks like in terms of production for the next 3 to 4 weeks. What we've realized is that you want to play where your current users are at. One of the biggest pain points in our industry is sort of the overload of technology. And if we're asking users to sort of enter data twice, that doesn't really play well. And then you have all sorts of issues when it comes to accuracy of that data. So integrations with your scheduling systems and look ahead systems is a must. And as long as when they're updated, it is brought into sort of the material management system, now you have a very clear idea and an accurate idea of what's happening on your job site across all of these three stakeholders, right? The general, the sub, and the suppliers are on the same page. Hey, this is what's happening next week. This is what should arrive on site. And if it doesn't, here's the impact to the job.
So then how do you make sure, though, That is a critical input. How do you make sure that actually stays updated and accurate? Like put yourself in kind of an operations mode where the months are turning, the weeks are turning, change orders are coming, designs changing, all sorts of things are happening. How do you keep that system working?
First of all, I think it's going back to your day-to-day production. So one of the things that we're enabling the superintendents to do is to sort of proactively look at the schedule and update what has happened on that day, whether the planned activities were completed. If not, to make sure that it's reflected in that planning system. Different superintendents use different systems. Most of the time, they're leveraging Excel or Microsoft Project to do their sort of look ahead scheduling. And one of the things that we're proactively doing is to make sure that they go and update those systems on a day-to-day basis when it comes to production. And that enables us to pull that most relevant information on site. And
Okay.
look, the future I'm hoping is where we have cameras and our auto capture information coming from the site fed directly into systems like us, where you don't necessarily have a human input updating these schedules. But I do see what you're saying, which is if that information's not updated, how do we have the most accurate sort of production schedule to a job site? And that's where we are right now.
Gotcha. So that covers the schedule input. You
Yeah.
work with superintendents, make sure they have their dates update. That's giving. What about the other information though? That's coming in. So I got to imagine there is updated designs, there's
Yeah.
change orders, there's the life of the project. If you're managing a material management system, how do you then make sure that that information is keeping it up to date and you're kind of being able to track the right quantities and the right lead times and things like that?
Yeah, great question, right? Let's start with submittals for an example, right? This is where, again, like the double entry is a no-no here, right? I think as platforms, we need to provide an open API and sort of connect with where customers are right now. For us, that means making sure we have integrations with Procore, Autodesk, CMIC, where customers actually manage their submittals, RFIs, and pulling that information and connecting the dots between RFIs, submittals, schedule, material is the biggest effort, right? It takes a lot of time. And that's why you don't see sort of one system where all of this information is centralized so that you can actually take clear action. That's where like systems like us come into play, where all that information through these integrations automatically comes into the system. For an example, if submittals are approved on Autodesk submitter or Procore, that information directly gets fed into our system where it says, hey, the submittal's approved, we can push this order out. So there's clarity on that data, and the data transitions from one system to the other very seamlessly. And that's an
Yeah,
important thing. Yeah.
that makes complete sense. Tactically, for people on site, do you see setting up a meeting? How do you think people manage this sort of change effectively on different construction projects? Because a lot of times you can have the greatest software in the world, but if you don't have the people processes in place to actually leverage the software you're using, it doesn't always work out well. So what are you seeing on how a material manager could pull the right people together, get the decisions made, leverage the software? Is that, a meeting, a series of meetings? Is it, I meet with the design people, I meet with the scheduling people, and then I take it to the superintendent, like most effective?
Change is not good in construction. I mean, people aren't against change, right? So if we look at the current process, right, we talked about like, the construction teams getting this procurement log ready. And then what happens is, you have a project engineer or your PM like chasing these subs to update like the status of like the critical components when it comes to the procurement law. We'll see an hour or 2 hour meeting scheduled every week so that they can go through these procurement items to make sure that things are coming on site. And for us, it's about not changing that workflow. It's making sure we're seamlessly integrated into that workflow. But what ends up happening is that procurement meeting between the GC and the subs is as smooth and efficient as possible. So if you're spending 2 hours running that meeting, it's a 30-minute meeting now because we are able to bring the most up-to-date information directly connecting with the suppliers and the vendors, making sure there is no variability in the lead time, making sure there's less variability in the lead times, and making sure we track the material and bring that information to the journal. So our goal is eventually we can almost eliminate that meeting because everyone's looking at the same data. But one of the things that we do is we can recommend or alert the entire team on potential issues in the supply chain. Then they can go and try to resolve that rather than trying to sort of get this information again and again in a very tedious manner.
Well, I definitely see the meeting changing shape. I don't know if I could see it eliminating completely. I think it definitely would morph and change shape into more of an action oriented, I have this information now. I know that, based on this progressive steel, we're not going to need this set of electrical equipment as soon. So let's shift our plans to adjust versus, have you gotten the piece of paper yet to know that you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it would change a little bit, morph and change shape. Okay. But this is very interesting.
I like that. I like that. I think you hit it on the head, which is a meeting that's more action oriented rather than getting statuses on these particular issues and then trying to like resolve them.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like being in a trailer room with 30 people.
Yeah, 100%.
7:30 a.m. procurement meeting.
Yeah.
You're wondering, did they just not put AC in that room, or what's going on? All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit. We've kind of been beating around the bush on the software company that you manage. So why don't you talk to me a little bit about Krane and what Krane is and what Krane does?
We're an end-to-end material control platform. We've realized that having a lot of our teams out there leverage delivery boards to manage the deliveries that are coming onto the job site so that they understand like whether they need a crane or forklift to manage constraints around deliveries coming onto the job site. We've realized that's an outcome of the effort during the planning stage. So you can't necessarily control the volume of material showing up on your site, but by just managing deliveries. So we start at the planning phase, which is we tie in all your constraints around supply chain to the schedule so that you can eliminate some of those constraints, whether it's submittals, RFIs, whether it's purchase orders, making sure that that critical information is released on time without impacting the supply. Then our system continuously works with the subcontractors and the vendors to get the most relevant information of that supply chain and update the system so that everyone's seeing the same data across the entire project. And for us, the icing on the cake is providing them with a delivery dashboard and logistics to control that material arriving on site. So that's what Krane does. It's an end-to-end process where GCs are enabled with a tool to control that risk associated with materials, not all materials equally, right? For your project, there might be only, a few materials that have a significant impact on your schedule. Outside of the others might be just consumables that are coming on site. Now, one of the most important pieces of information that we bring to the table is the quantity. People understand that, okay, look, material need to show up on site, like we have to remove these constraints, but how much? That's the other angle that Krane brings in. We're trying to figure out how much material is the right quantity of material to arrive on site based on the production capacity on your job.
Why is that important, the right sort of quantity? Because they imagine they have a system in right now that they're using that, hey, they're bringing in material and they do it some way. Why is Krane so much better or more efficient at what they're currently doing?
I think it's, first of all, showing teams how much material is on site. I think that's a data point that people don't pay attention to, right? Like, for an example, if you go on a level one on a job, like you'll see drywall all over the place, and your plumbing team's actually trying to find space around that drywall to sort of get production going. And you have these different production zones and material in the way, and that's slowing down production. One of the first things that Krane does, it's going to show you how much materials is on site and whether that is a bottleneck to the production. So one of the things that we track is what is your productivity on the job or the production rate with the actual material that's on site, and give the GCs, and for us, that's a leading indicator to project outcomes. So that's how we see it.
Define productivity for me here. So you get the schedule information, you have, I don't know, let's say like high voltage cable. Are you just looking at the activities in which you have assigned the material to and how much they finished and on time or not, and kind of looking at the volume of the WIP that's going through the system? Working place for people who don't know. If you
Yeah,
don't know WIP, go look up lean and dive into that rabbit hole. But okay, so that's what you're looking at in terms of what you're calling productivity.
100%. And we're looking at, okay, how much material was actually pulled in and how much was achieved on the job site. We're not going into the details or into the weeds of productivity, labor, productivity per hour, but we're simply looking at what was planned and what was achieved and what was the material impact on that plan.
Interesting. What's the for Crane? What's the setup time like? How long does it take you to go from zero to rocking and rolling in the system? I got to imagine there's some data input and setup and stuff like that. I mean, how are you making that setup? Well, let's just start with that. How long does it take to set up? I don't want to hit you with too many questions.
I think the setup time is about 1 to 2 days, which is pretty fast because of all the integrations that we've set up. Like I said, right, supply chain process starts all the way from your specs and your drawings and your submittals.
Yeah.
And thankfully, we have some good open APIs now that can pull that information pretty fast. So the
So you pull it
integrations
from like an Autodesk 360 or something. You can just pull it all in.
Autodesk, Procore, CMIC. These are the
Yeah.
three major tools that we work with. So we're able to sort of integrate pretty quickly and bring that information into the system. Schedule is the most tricky one. Either we need to integrate with like Project or Primavera. Excel sheets get uploaded into the system pretty quickly. Bill of materials, again, right? Your procurement log or your buyout is a simple Excel sheet that gets into the system. Now, what's exciting about our system is we've developed this AI technology, which is called SmartLink, that links all of these different types of data to the schedule. That's where, as a scheduler or as even a superintendent, you don't necessarily have the time to sort of put these different types of information into the schedule so that you manage your constraints. Right? That's where Krane is really good at upfront. The integration process is a couple of days, and we can get the system running for the team.
Very interesting. And I've already forgotten the second question because I think you covered it.
I think you're really excited about the smart link that you've forgotten about everything else.
I know. You start
Yeah.
talking about AI and smart links and me not having to type everything in. One thing I will say is if you want to be a hero on your job site as a planner or scheduler, dive into material management and procurement management and go help some people out, find their dates, sort it out. It's a great way to start figuring out, how to really bring efficiencies to your job sites. Eshan, thank you for coming on. Love hearing about Krane. Highly recommend people go check it out. We'll provide some links down below wherever you're watching. Any final thoughts you want to leave the crowd with?
I think we have this vision to help our frontline workers focus on what they're really good at, which is to build. I think, unfortunately, we have the most hardworking people in the front lines, and what's inefficient is all of these supporting processes. So our goal is to make that process as efficient and seamless as possible. And our focus is on materials. Let's get the right materials at the right time. Let the builders who are amazing build. As long as we do that, I think we'll move our industry in the right direction.
Yeah, completely agree. Said in another way, take that pastel 3 billion line spreadsheet that you have been tracking material out, punt it out, bring in Krane. No one wants to see those pastel 48 column, 3,000 line deep spreadsheet where you're managing everything in. It's just not efficient.
And people make mistakes, right? Then this is where we could leverage technology and use it efficiently, right?
Yeah. Your VLOOKUP will eventually break, folks. All right. Thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. For everybody else, why don't you tell a friend about the show? Why don't you share it with a coworker, help them out, help build us the community. But for us at Beyond Deadlines, have a great week, and we'll see you on the next one.